Tonight we're going to talk about the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. That is going to be Proposition 64 on the ballot in California in November. And I've got two guests here tonight. Jessica McKenzie. She is the executive director of the Inland Cannabis Farmers Association. And I've got Jason Brown here. He is a consultant and expert witness in matters related to marijuana in the courts. And he has consulted with me and other lawyers and been an expert witness for me and other lawyers in Northern California when people were charged with marijuana crimes, and also has helped me and many other lawyers in California advise clients on how to legally grow and use marijuana and share marijuana as medicine throughout California. So, Jason, let me just ask you to describe in a little more detail what you do for a living.
Okay, so I have a consulting firm in the cannabis industry. I've been helping people for many years now with their business formation and with research and development. I've got some educational products that I share with the industry, and I've been an expert witness for about 16 years now. So I testify a lot in court cases and help the court figure out what's going on. So I have a unique perspective there, and I like to share some of what I know today.
All right. So if somebody's charged with a marijuana crime, you would be called as a witness to give your opinion on what kinds of things?
Well, it really varies, but oftentimes I'm called in to help educate the court about how much cannabis people tend to use for medicinal purposes, how it's used, how it's processed and manufactured, also to help determine what amounts of usable cannabis are present, or to help estimate the yield of a cannabis farm. Just what I've picked up over the years, I can also help a lot of times with the legal strategy for the case.
How did you get into this, Jason?
Well, I had the first cannabis dispensary in Humboldt County back from 1997 through 2001. I had the first dispensary in the county of Humboldt. I helped to develop the very first ID card program for patients in the state. I served at the bequest of the Board of Supervisors on the first committee, the standing committee on medical marijuana in Humboldt County. So I have a lot of history. Also as a farmer, I've been a farmer for 16, 17 years and providing direct access to patients through my farms.
And what about before all this marijuana stuff? What did you do before that?
Well, I've always had an interest in law, so that's been kind of more of a personal hobby. But prior to that, I did a lot of environmental work. I did conservation-related work for several years.
What kind of work?
Reforestation, wild animal surveys for endangered species. Before that, I worked with the California Conservation Corps for several years, which was really fun.
When you were a lad?
When I was a young man, yes.
Okay.
When I could use a shovel better.
Jessica, let me ask a little bit more about you. What do you do with this Inland Cannabis Farmers Association?
Well, we are far more localized, I think, than the efforts that Jason does. We are predominantly about helping farmers in Butte County. Even though we have members beyond that, our focus is on trying to deal with, I don't know what to call it, the climate at the local level, because no matter what happens at the state level, it's all going to get interpreted and implemented locally. And if we don't build allies and bridges and foundations and ways to do this legitimately locally, then it doesn't really matter. MRSA doesn't matter, ALMA doesn't matter, none of it matters if our farmers aren't allowed to participate in the new marketplace.
Now, I should say that you successfully wrote and got enough people to sign petitions to get a local initiative on the ballot. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. We actually haven't heard yet. The local election on June 7th took so long for them to count that they haven't gotten around to counting our signatures yet. But our hope is that we have enough qualified signatures that we will have an initiative on the ballot in November.
And what will that initiative do if that makes it to the ballot?
Start over. In other words, clear the slate of everything, all the tit for tat stuff that's been going back and forth in Butte County for a long time, and basically
Now,
say,
basically, there's the Butte County's passed a bunch of laws preventing growers and patients from growing and sharing marijuana here locally.
it's fairly restrictive. I mean, it's been all over the map over the last 6 years, but right now it's extremely restrictive. And we're saying, let's start over. Let's just look at what makes sense. MRSA passed, right? So now we have a framework, great. We're an agricultural county, so we have zoning about where crops belong. Let's just use those things. Let's use zoning, let's use MRSA, let's figure it out logically.
Now, MRSA is a law that was just passed in California by the legislature and the governor to basically allow cities and counties, county by county and city by city, to license people to grow and distribute marijuana
Yes.
for medicinal purposes.
Yeah, it's the commercial cultivation and commerce for medicinal cannabis.
But it also allows cities and counties to essentially prohibit any of that.
It does not, it doesn't take away the control. And I don't think anything will ever pass at the state level that denies cities, counties, municipalities the right to control it any way they choose to. Which is why I think that the work that we're doing, not that either work is more important, but the work that we're doing is trying to make sure that as all these new state rules, laws roll out, that our county and the counties that affect our farmers are willing to let them play.
So how did you get involved in all this, Jessica?
It's a really great question. I don't always have a great answer because I haven't been an activist for a long time. I've been an activist for maybe 3 years. And though I grew up in the 60s, which means to me, cannabis has always been around my life, even though I didn't necessarily partake. It's been a commonplace substance in my life, my social group, right? Worst case, it's a benign substance in my mind. So I didn't really particularly care until, as happens for most people, I think, something got personal. And I started meeting people. I met people who used to be in wheelchairs who aren't. I met people who were in stage 4 cancer who aren't. And I started thinking, you mean it's more than glaucoma and arthritis, which is what I remembered from 25 years ago? So those personal experiences, I think, drive one to say, wait a minute, what is it that we're denying our citizens? Why are we so over-regulating something that has so much potential?
So in other words, you met people who were in wheelchairs, and then with medicinal cannabis, they were able to live normal, happy lives without a wheelchair.
Certainly, I don't know if the happy comes with it, but certainly the ability to get out of that wheelchair is more likely to do that, yeah. And then it got even more personal for me. I was a caretaker for my father-in-law. I was end-of-life caretaker for my mother and my father, and then my husband's father. And he had Alzheimer's, and he did something called sundowning. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically he started the morning in a very chipper mood, very upbeat, very frisky kind of guy, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon he was anxious and paranoid and combative and argumentative and just totally fearful. And one day I came home and he was in a good mood in the afternoon, and I had a caregiver there with him, and I found out the next day when he went back to sundowning that they'd given him a cookie that had cannabis in it. And he'd had this great afternoon, and he'd been cracking jokes, and he was his usual self. And he spent the last 7 months of his life having half a cookie every day. His life got better, our home life got better, a whole lot of things got better with no harm, right? Could we cure him? No. Did he have a really wonderful passing? Yeah. So it gets personal, and when it gets personal and right in your face and you see that it's not all a bunch of hype, it's pretty hard to walk away from it. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I have the time to spend. Not everybody does. But that's what brought me into it.
Well, today I wanted to talk about this Adult Use of Marijuana Act, the Proposition 64 Act, and well, what is the new law if it came into?
Well, I think it's probably good to start with where it comes from and how that relates to the industry itself. I have, several bullet points opposed to it and reasons why it may not be the best.
So you're opposed to it?
I am.
Why are you opposed to it?
Well, there are several reasons, but I think the bottom line is it really still continues criminalization under the guise of legalization. And so it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, essentially. There are too many aspects of it that would still be harmful, both to patients and to the recreational users that would now be able to purchase cannabis legally. And there's too many loopholes left in place to continue the prohibitions in other ways against cannabis.
So explain some of the ways that it would actually make it so people could, well, let's talk about patients. Patients that right now have recommendations for the use of marijuana by their doctors. And right now they have a constitutional right to grow and use marijuana under Proposition 215. How would it affect them?
Well, it's interesting. It's a great question. You know, the only rights that we have in California all stem from the Compassionate Use Act. You know, and even the Medical Marijuana Program Act, which came later, was based on the Compassionate Use Act. And so because that was an initiative back in 1996, the only way for the state to effectively change it would be through another initiative process. And that's the reason a lot of people are concerned about ALMA, because while it does give lip service to maintaining the status quo, there are provisions within ALMA that would certainly grant the California legislature the right to tinker with it. And in so doing, they could effectively undermine the Compassionate Use Act without having that protection in place anymore, because this is also an initiative and theoretically could be seen as a way to circumvent or change the Compassionate Use Act.
So if the Compassionate Use Act was seen, for example, to allow patients, which I think is the law in California, to grow and use marijuana for their own medicinal use and for people that they're taking care of, another initiative like this Proposition 64 would, if passed, would presumably take the place of that, or at least limit a patient's rights.
It could. In any situation where there was a legal argument being made that a court would have to decide the answer to, that could happen. And you know, the funny thing is, the Compassionate Use Act, as you well know, was only one page long. And we have been arguing in court about its interpretation for almost 20 years now. This is 64 pages. Can you imagine?
Said earlier, I
what could be?
Back up though. You said earlier that there was something in this language in Prop 64 that basically specifically says that all of the rights under Proposition 215 won't be messed with. Is that true? There's
a section in the initiative that states that it is not its intention to in any way change the Compassionate Use Act. However, there's no language prohibiting it. It's not a prohibitive language. It's really more of an intention. And there are many sections within ALMA that I believe could be used to legally challenge the Compassionate Use Act in court.
Well, let's stop there because if there is language in there that says that it's the intention of Proposition 64 not to change anything in Proposition 215, then wouldn't the courts respect that and say, okay, we have all these rights under Proposition 215 and we have all these new rights under the recreational pot initiative. So all the patients can do what they've always been allowed to do and everybody else can have an ounce of weed. I mean, wouldn't that be the way to interpret it?
I think that's a wonderful theoretical, but unfortunately, ALMA specifically allows the California legislature to amend any provisions about anything in it. And so that effectively would give the legislature the ability to amend aspects of the Compassionate Use Act, because this would regulate every aspect of what normally the Compassionate Use Act would have, what we would have relied on the Compassionate Use Act.
Well, except that if it says that it's not going to affect the Compassionate Use Act, then wouldn't the court say, okay, there's one law for patients and one law for people that aren't patients? What?
Well, it says a lot of other things is the problem. It gives lip service, in my opinion, but I don't see any teeth to the notion that it's going to protect the Compassionate Use Act. The language is not effective enough to really do the job, in my opinion.
Well, so there are some organizations that are in favor of this initiative. I understand that NORML is in favor of this initiative. NORML is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and it's your understanding and my understanding that they're in favor of this initiative. True?
Yes, I believe California NORML is. I don't know if National NORML has weighed in, but I believe Dale Geringer is relatively in favor of this, and he's California
He has
NORML.
expressed his support for it.
And you know, what I've heard from them is that, well, there's a lot of problems with this, but hey, it's better than nothing. And there's a feeling that, well, we could always fix it later. And I just feel, 64 pages of potential problems is going to be a lot harder to fix later than if we just take a pause and don't do it now.
So you say potential problems. What specifically in the new Prop 64 do you think is a potential problem?
Well, I have a list.
Well, tell me the big problem.
Okay, well, one of the big problems is that it really allows the local bans to effectively stay in place without any kind of challenge. And so there's already going to be a patchwork of brown cities and counties.
Well, but I mean, that's already true.
That's true under MRSA right now.
So
it's true.
This law isn't really going to make that any worse. Right?
Well, it's going to cement it because it's an initiative. If there's any aspects of MRSA that could be challenged by the Compassionate Use Act, this will supersede.
Yeah, but the courts have already allowed cities and counties to prohibit it, even under Proposition 215, right?
Right, but this effectively would seal any legal challenges that could be made about those bans in the future.
But it would also allow cities and counties, if they wanted to open it up.
True.
Which they already can do, medicinally.
Well, medicinally, but they can't do it just for anybody that wants to have an ounce of
But
weed.
it's just another step. It's just the difference.
Well, I know, but I mean, it seems to me like this law basically says that anybody that's an adult can grow 6 plants and have an ounce of weed for their own recreational purposes, correct?
Yes, effectively, that's what it says.
And that's kind of simple, isn't it? And a lot of people, I mean, if people are in favor of that, then they're in favor of that, and they don't have to get a doctor and and have some kind of illness. Everybody can just kind of grow their own.
If it was that simple, then it wouldn't be one. It would be one page. It wouldn't be 64 pages. It effectively, there's a lot of problems with it.
So what are the problems?
So
Okay.
how does somebody who lives in an apartment in San Francisco get cannabis? The whole thing about you can have your ounce, you can grow your 6 plants, whatever. What does this thing get us that that MRSA did not? When I look at it, I almost go, okay, you got 64, 65 pages of stuff that is mostly about how to make a lot of money if you're a big player in the field, but doesn't talk a lot about protecting patients' rights, and doesn't talk at all about how to protect local small farmers. What is it buying us that MRSA did not buy us? Because MRSA actually does. The complaint has always been, it's too easy to get a card. Okay,
You mean
fine.
a doctor's recommendation.
Yeah, if you get a record, it's too easy. Anybody can get it for anything. If that's true, then this doesn't buy us a whole heck of a lot. And it is so full of inconsistencies within itself, and it is too much too soon. I will tell you that I have not read all 65 pages of it. I don't claim to be an expert. I've read the summaries, I've read the analyses. And when I look at it and I hear something called legalization, and that's how they sold it, and that's how they pitched it, and that's how they took it to the streets. Are you for legalizing cannabis? Then sign this petition. And if you give away, share, or own more than an ounce, you can be charged with a crime. That is not legalization. It's legalization in wolf's clothing. They need to actually take the bigger, longer picture, not just the how can we prepare for big ag and big pharma to come in and make lots of money. It is an inadequate and inconsistent and overly complicated piece of legislation, not legislation, excuse me, an initiative on the heels of MRSA before MRSA has even rolled out. It will only confuse the issue. There are people who are very concerned about a lot of the legal loopholes in it and legal inconsistencies in it. And when I look at it, I go, I don't see what it buys me. I can have with MRSA, I can have 500 square feet. My house, my yard, anywhere. So what does this get me? 6 plants. Can I get 6 plants and 500 square feet? I think so. Maybe a little tight. Maybe I'd have to keep the shrimp. It doesn't address the fundamental issues of legalization. I should be able to own cannabis and not go to jail for it. End of story. And it does not do that.
Why doesn't it do that? It sounds like it does do that.
It does not do that. Over an ounce, you can go to jail for over an ounce. You can be charged for over an ounce with a criminal offense. If I give you more than an ounce, if you and I are neighbors, right? Or you're my friend down the street and you have Blue Dream in your backyard and I've got some platinum Girl Scout cookies in my yard and we want to swap. If I give you more than an ounce, I'm actually committing a crime. If we trade more than an ounce, we are both committing crimes. That is not legalization. And to call something the legalization of cannabis and to play into people's emotions and intentions and to say, 58, 62% of the people want legalized cannabis, call this legalized cannabis, sell it as legalized cannabis, and then keep putting people in jail?
So it's not,
I think that's a problem.
It's not actually legalizing cannabis. It's actually making cannabis harder to legally grow and possess and use and share.
It's making it easier for big companies to produce cannabis on a commercial scale and have an outlet for their products. That is easier.
It
Small
also-
farmers, no. Patients, no.
And
So-
it plays into the prohibition, basically what prohibitionists have been saying about cannabis for so long, all the lies about its dangers to society and to people and to everything. It plays into that because it's basically treating it like a very dangerous drug rather than like a beneficial herb. Here's some other problems with it. All of the money, under ALMA, all of the money, if Prop 64 were to pass, goes to enforcement and to rehabilitation programs. None of it's going to go to schools, none of it's going to go to support police or fire departments or local community interests. It all goes to enforcement and to drug rehabilitation. Again, they're treating cannabis as if it's something that it isn't. A lot of money goes into addiction treatment. We know cannabis is not addictive. So there's just so many things wrong with it.
You're right, it does cement that narrative, doesn't it?
And you were right too. It literally makes it illegal to give away any cannabis, not just the ounce. There's a specific section that makes it illegal to give away cannabis at all. So I don't understand how we can legalize something and make it illegal to give it away for free. That makes no sense either. I see this as just a boon to the pharmaceutical companies who, there's also a sunset, I think it's a few years, allowing small businesses to try to compete, and then when that sunset expires, the really big companies are going to come just take the industry. So I see this as a real attack on small businesses too.
It will eventually down the road if it passes. All the focus on how to make commercial sales possible and commercial production possible will normalize it. It will mainstream it. But the people who created this industry, the people who've been fighting for it for decades, the people who believed in this plant as medicine long before the general population had any concept of that, those people who've been growing this for decades are the ones who are going to be swept aside, because they're not going to be able to compete with Philip Morris or Pfizer or any of the other big players. And if the legislation or the initiative, the laws that come about only favor the inevitable big winners anyway, and don't take the time to protect the small family farmer, then they're going to lose. They're going to be gone. And it's a way that it's almost like the last family farmer. We don't have those left in California, except when it comes to cannabis, maybe a few other small industries, But it's not about the patient, and it's not about the small farmer, and it's actually not even really about cannabis, except to continue to build and cement that narrative about it's something that needs close watching and close control. And the reason it does that is so that the big commercial players can come in and make their money while the rest of these people are still having to fight the little knockdown, drag out neighborhood battles.
It would also make it harder. There's sections in Prop 64 that will make it harder for patients to maintain their doctor's approvals. There's sections that basically refer it back to some MRSA guidelines that basically that primary care physicians will have to issue the recommendations. And as anyone who's been to cannabis specialists knows, The cannabis physician is a specialist for a reason. They've studied cannabis, they are aware of how it helps people. They have a genuine interest in people's health and how cannabis can treat their illness. Most of the primary care physicians through the clinics in California are actually under orders to not discuss cannabis with their patients for insurance purposes or the management of the clinics.
Let me tell you what I believe. I believe that if we were truly going to legalize marijuana, then we just make it legal and not have 65 pages of new laws putting people in jail and prison for growing marijuana, using it as medicine, or using it for whatever. And I think that voters should vote against this initiative because I think that it actually creates more laws against people growing and using marijuana.
Yeah, I agree.
One of the most common arguments to vote for it is not really endorsing it in and of itself, but it's more what will happen to the movement, what will happen to the what is seen as a progression of cities and counties and states moving in the direction of legalization. If California votes this down, what will happen to the momentum? And that's really the strongest, most prevalent argument that I hear for voting for it is what will people think if we defeat it? And I have to tell you, I was on the phone this morning with one of our supervisors here who basically is saying the same narrative about let's just see what happens in November. And I said, well, what is it that you think you're going to learn in November? And well, we'll know whether people are really for cannabis or not.
No.
Maybe that's not what you would learn. Is it Ohio or Iowa where they had the one they just recently turned down?
It was turned down because it was another wolf in sheep's clothing. Yeah. And people know how to read, and they can read between the lines and make the distinction.
But it will be used. If Alma is defeated here in California, it will be used by some folks to say, see, people really don't want legal cannabis, because they will interpret that defeat as the public voting against cannabis and the legalization of cannabis, that oversimplistic interpretation. And that's one of the strongest arguments to vote for it that most people are bandying about. Not because anybody loves it.
So but again, voting out of fear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It also doesn't contain a right to work, so it's effectively you would still be able to be fired from your job if you had cannabis in your bloodstream. So it's, that's not going to change anything.
It also protect kids either, does it? The whole thing with Child Protective Services, does it?
No, it gives lip service to the Child Protective Services issue, but it really doesn't prevent CPS from still, targeting families of people who grow commercially.
Okay, well, Jason, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. Really very illuminating. Thank you, Jessica, for coming in, and this was a really great discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. It's a pleasure. Always
thank
a pleasure.
you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. All right. Thank you very much.
Good, wrap?
It's a wrap.